The wind cut like a knife in the cemetery, bringing with it the salt from the Pacific. I held my black shawl firm under my chin and fixed my gaze on the coffin. Arturo, 68 years walking this earth, and nothing had prepared me to see him descend into the ground. The man who stabilized every step I took. The bench at the front was empty, a stark contrast against the gray sky and the swaying pines. That spot should have been occupied by my son Esteban, my only child. Instead, it opened up like a wound, a reminder of his absence sharper than the cold. Rosario Mendez, my neighbor for 30 years, stood beside me. She squeezed my hand with the firmness of someone who knows that silence can speak louder than words of comfort. She brought stews when Arturo fell ill. She stayed with me on sleepless nights. She wasn't my blood, but she was family. The priest's words faded. All I heard was the echo of Arturo's laugh in our kitchen, the rustle of his pencil over blueprints in the study, his quiet voice saying, "Esperanza, storms pass." But this storm seemed eternal. When the last prayer was over and the small crowd dispersed, I stayed. The cemetery worker gave me a polite nod, giving me space. Rosario touched my arm and left, leaving me alone with the earth and the coffin. Then I felt a presence behind me, a man in a banker's coat, someone I recognized from Arturo's dealings in the center of Puerto Esmeralda. He approached with careful steps. He held out a sealed envelope. "Doña Esperanza," he said in a low voice, "I was asked to deliver this to you today." Confused, I opened it right there, with the wind tugging at the papers. My eyes sharpened as I read the heading, Family Torres Trust Withdrawal Request, filing date, yesterday, applicant, Esteban Torres. My knees buckled, but I held onto the iron railing of the path. As I prepared to bury my husband, my son had tried to rip away Arturo's legacy. The pain of grief hardened into something colder, firmer. The funeral was over, but another kind of burial was beginning, that of the illusions I still had about Esteban's loyalty. I folded the papers back into the envelope and put it in my coat. When I turned toward the car, the wind had calmed, as if waiting for what would come next.
That night, after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. My hands trembled as I slid my finger across my cell phone, not just from grief, but from what filled the screen. Esteban's face, radiant with celebration, illuminated under the lights of a rooftop in Mexico City. Beside him, Teresa Mondragon raised a champagne glass, the city's skyline shining behind them. The time of publication hurt more than the photos themselves. It was published just as Arturo was being lowered into the ground. Neighbors came, whispering condolences. Even Rosario stayed until dusk. But my son was toasting with strangers while I cried alone. It was almost midnight when headlights illuminated the driveway. The door of Esteban's car slammed shut. His quick steps on the porch, he entered without knocking, bringing with him a faint scent of whiskey and cologne. "Mom," he said, shaking the cold from his coat, "we need to talk about Dad's trust." My heart pounded against my ribs. Not a word about the funeral, not an apology for his absence, just the trust. "It's 15 million pesos, he insisted, leaning against the counter as if it were a negotiation table. "Teresa and I need it to be released for the wedding. Think of it as an investment in our future. Dad would have wanted that." I studied him. His eyes moved too quickly, his voice charged with urgency. For a moment, I looked for my little boy, the child Arturo carried on his shoulders, the teenager who swore to make us proud. I only saw a man with hunger in his eyes, and it wasn't for love. I set my tea on the table and folded my hands. "Show me a budget," I said calmly. "Then we'll talk." He clenched his jaw but nodded as if he had agreed. When he left, the silence in the house was heavier than before. I climbed the stairs slowly, with the banker's envelope still hidden in my coat, knowing this was just the beginning. The next morning, I opened Arturo's study for the first time since his death. The room smelled faintly of old paper and cedar, the air still thick with his presence. His desk, an oak slab scarred by decades of use, seemed to be waiting for me. I placed the envelope the banker gave me next to the worn leather strongbox that Arturo guarded like a sentinel. Don Alvaro Rivas arrived soon after. He had been Arturo's lawyer for nearly 30 decades, a man with thin silver hair, quick eyes, and a voice that carried the weight of old courtrooms. He greeted me with an unusual gentleness, before sitting across from me at the desk. Together, we opened the strongbox, sifting through Arturo's meticulous folders. At the bottom was a document marked with his firm handwriting, Family Torres Trust, Addendum. Don Alvaro adjusted his glasses and read aloud in a measured tone. In the event of my death, access to discretionary funds will require proof of respects and care during the last year of my life. I took a sharp breath. Respect. Arturo had thought of everything. Don Alvaro put the paper down and looked at me directly. "Your son didn't visit Arturo in the hospice, Doña Esperanza, and his absence yesterday did not—" He didn't finish, but the implication was clear. Esteban had failed the tests Arturo left. I pressed my palm against the desk, steadying myself. Arturo knew. He must have seen what I refused to admit. Don Alvaro sighed. If Esteban and his fiancée insist, they will look for another angle, guardianship. They will say you are not fit to manage the trust. The idea cut deeper than I expected. To be stripped of my dignity in the name of protection by my own son. I took Arturo's fountain pen from the drawer. Heavy, solid brass, smoothed where his fingers had held it for years of contracts and letters. I slipped it into my pocket. If they were going to question my mind, I would face them with Arturo's firmness in my hand. And when Esteban and Teresa called again, I would be ready. I agreed to meet Teresa at her apartment in Polanco. Though every kilometer from Puerto Esmeralda to Mexico City felt like a betrayal of Arturo's wishes. The doorman greeted me with rehearsed charm, and the elevator opened to a space of glass and marble that looked more like a showroom than a home. Teresa welcomed me with a smile as polished as the silver tray she carried, placing 2 porcelain cups with jasmine tea on the table. "I wanted you to see our vision," she said, sliding a glossy folder across the table. On the cover, embossed in gold, it read, "The Mondragon Torres Wedding Project." I turned the pages slowly, one after another, filled with designs for ballrooms, floral arrangements, and haute couture dresses. A budget column ran down the side, though most of it ended in vague notes, "to be defined" or "pending estimate." "How much is already paid?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Teresa's hand fluttered. "We've made some deposits." "Nothing significant yet," I insisted. "And the balances?" Her jaw tightened. "It's all manageable. Credit lines. Esteban is handling it." The more I asked, the more the veneer cracked.
Behind the glossy photos were inflated credit card debts, a six-figure loan from a private source, and losses from a cryptocurrency scheme she admitted seemed promising at first. Finally, she slammed the folder shut. Her smile had vanished. "Doña Esperanza," she said in a sharp voice, "your son is drowning. If you love him, you'll save him. This isn't extravagance, it's survival." I stood up, smoothing my coat. If survival looks like gilded menus and designer dresses, then you and I have very different dictionaries. Her eyes narrowed, but I no longer cared to listen. I walked past the marble counters and glass walls that overlooked a city glittering with the fortunes of others. In my pocket, Arturo's pen pressed into my palm, silently anchoring me. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I felt the first glimmer of fury burning steady in my chest. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a disguise for ruin. And now I knew how deep the hole was. The house in Puerto Esmeralda felt colder than I remembered. Arturo and I built it with pride 40 years ago, and now its walls seemed to resonate with intrigue instead of love. I entered the living room and found Esteban pacing, Teresa perched elegantly on the sofa, and to my surprise, my niece, Caridad Vega, sitting stiffly in an armchair. Caridad hadn't set foot in my house in years, not since she cut ties with much of the family over old grudges. Her eyes met mine briefly, then darted away, but the tension in her posture betrayed discomfort.
"We thought it was best to get everyone together," Teresa began, sliding a neat pile of papers onto the coffee table. "A family matter deserves a family solution." I took the first page. It was an addendum to Arturo's trust, naming Teresa as co-trustee. The signature at the bottom looked eerily like Arturo's, but my pulse quickened. Arturo never signed with blue ink. His fountain pen bled black, always. Before I could speak, Ariadad blurted out, "Don't pretend this is noble. Teresa's brother's company is collapsing, and everyone knows it. This has nothing to do with marriage or love. You're trying to patch a hole with money that was never yours." The room froze. Esteban's face paled. Teresa's lips tightened into a thin line. I flipped through the pages, studying the metadata Don Alvaro had printed for me earlier. The file date screamed the truth. This forgery was created last week, long after Arturo's death. Esteban leaned forward, panic in his eyes. "Mom, you don't understand." "I understand enough," I said, my voice colder than the November air outside. "The ink gives you away." Ariadide pushed her chair back, disgust sharpening her features. "I won't be a part of this circus," she snapped, storming out and slamming the door. The silence that followed was heavier than a stone. Esteban fumbled for words. Teresa threw daggers with her eyes, but I collected the forged papers in my bag. My hand brushed against Arturo's pen, and its weight stabilized me. This wasn't family. It was a circle closing in on greed, and I wouldn't stand in the center unarmed. The cafe in Puerto Esmeralda buzzed with the clatter of laptops and the hiss of steamed milk, but at my corner table, the air was tense with something sharper. Esteban was across from me, his shoulders straight as if negotiating a deal rather than talking to his mother. Beside him, Teresa leaned back in her chair, her designer coat wrapped like armor. A man I didn't recognize, their lawyer, adjusted his tie and slid a folder across the table. "Doña Esperanza," he began smoothly. "There are concerns about her capacity to handle such a significant sum. 15 million pesos requires clear judgment and stable oversight." Esteban nodded, his voice clipped. "Mom, you've been through a lot. You're grieving. Maybe it's best for someone else to take responsibility now." Teresa's eyes gleamed. A judge can protect you from yourself, she said, each word a dagger wrapped in silk. I flipped my hands around Arturo's pen, hidden in my pocket, and let their words settle before I responded. Protect me, I said slowly, or protect your debts. For a moment, no one spoke. Teresa's lawyer cleared his throat, mumbling about fiduciary prudence. Esteban shifted uncomfortably, his bravado wavering. Behind them at the next table, Rosario sat silently with her tea. She didn't meet my gaze, but I saw the small red light of her cell phone recording. Rosario, always loyal. More family than the two people across from me. Teresa leaned forward, her perfume strong, her voice low. This is your chance to do the right thing for Esteban, to honor Arturo's memory by ensuring his legacy strengthens the family. I held her gaze with mine. Arturo's memory is not a piggy bank for your schemes. His legacy was built on respect, not entitlement. Esteban opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, cutting him off. The cafe's bustle grew around us, but in that small circle, a line had been drawn. I picked up my bag, leaving their folder untouched on the table. The weight of Arturo's pen pressed firm against my side as I walked out into the cool air of Puerto Esmeralda, already knowing where this battle would lead. The family court in Mexico City smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, its high ceilings echoing with every cough and shuffle. I sat at the defense table with Don Alvaro Rivas beside me, Arturo's pen in my hand like a talisman. Across the aisle, Esteban avoided my gaze, his face set in a mask of righteousness. Teresa was rigid at his side, whispering into her lawyer's ear. The hearing began quickly. Their lawyer stood, painting a picture of me as fragile, broken by grief, and unfit to handle the trust. His words cut not because they were true, but because they came from the mouth of my own blood. Then, Marisol took the stand. My heart clenched as she raised her hand to swear. This was the same girl who shared birthday cakes in my kitchen, who once called me her second mother. She sat up straight and spoke of my supposed confusion, how I would forget conversations, lose my keys, repeat myself. Her eyes were fixed on the judge, never on me. Each lie piled more weight on my chest. Don Alvaro rose, as calm as ever. Your Honor, he said, before we proceed, the defense has evidence. The bailiff connected Rosario's cell phone to the courtroom monitor. A grainy video appeared. Teresa in a parking lot, leaning into Marisol's car window. Her voice was unmistakable. Just say she seemed confused, forgetful. The judge will believe you. She's old, she's grieving. Do it for Esteban. A murmur went through the room. Marisol's composure broke, her cheeks flushed as she shrank in the witness stand. Don Alvaro stepped forward holding a folder. And here is the original declaration of intent from Arturo Torres. His words: funds shall be solely for the education of Caleb Torres or for the welfare of my wife, Esperanza Torres. They shall never be used for discretionary purposes such as weddings. The judge reviewed the document, then fixed his gaze at Esteban. This court finds no grounds for guardianship. Petition denied. His gavel struck once, final and dry. I exhaled, the tension unwound from my body. Relief came, but it was mixed with something heavier, a grief not just for Arturo, but for the family I thought I had. Leaving the courthouse, Don Alvaro murmured, "You won today." But all I could think was that a victory in law did not erase the wound carved by betrayal. And yet I knew I had to move forward because the fight wasn't over. Arturo's workshop still smelled faintly of sawdust, though the tools were untouched and a fine layer of dust covered the benches. I moved through the space, running my fingers over the drawers labeled in his neat script. In a corner, under a stack of rolled papers, I found his final sketchbook. I sat on the stool he preferred, the leather seat cracked from years of use, and opened it carefully. Page after page revealed his hand-drawn plans, a hospice wing, modest but full of light, designed for comfort rather than sterility.
Notes filled the margins, windows toward the sunset, garden access for patients, quiet rooms for families. My throat tightened as I traced the lines. Arturo hadn't been thinking of himself in those last months. He had been dreaming for others.
For the first time since the funeral, my heart lifted with purpose. Maybe the trust wasn't meant to be spent on banquets and champagne. Maybe it was meant to build something lasting, something Arturo himself had envisioned. The slam of a car door broke the silence. Moments later, Esteban appeared in the doorway, disheveled, beads of sweat on his forehead. His voice cracked before his pride could mask it. "Mom, please, just this once. The collectors are coming for me. I can't hold them off." He fell to his knees on the workshop floor, the same place where he played with toy trucks as a boy. His hands trembled as they reached for mine. "Help me, please." The sketchbook was open beside me, Arturo's dream staring at me in black ink. I looked at my desperate, broken son and felt the weight of both choices pressing down on me. The decision I made in that moment would define more than money. It would decide whose legacy would endure.
We met in the annex of the courthouse, the air heavy with the smell of stale coffee and the echo of heels on tile. Esteban was across from me, his eyes sunken, his suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it. Teresa stood by his side, scrolling through her phone, her attention elsewhere. I laid out the terms with deliberate calm. "I will not release Arturo's trust for a wedding," I said, sliding the papers across the table. "But I will pay for therapy and financial counseling. I will match every peso you save for a year. If you build a foundation, I will help strengthen it, but not with shortcuts, not with deceit." Esteban's face flushed. He pushed his chair back, his fists shaking. "You'd rather let me drown than help me breathe," he yelled, his voice raw with rage. Teresa rolled her eyes, muttered something about not having signed up for this, and left without looking back. The door closed with a hollow thud. Esteban's fury collapsed into sobs, his shoulders shaking as if the weight of every mistake had come crashing down at once. I remained still, watching my adult son fall apart. Finally, I placed a hand on the papers. "This is the only rope I will throw you, Esteban. Whether you climb it or not, that's your choice." Later, in the quiet of my garden, I knelt among the rose bushes Arturo planted years ago. Their thorns pricked through my gloves as I pruned the branches, but the flowers glowed red and rich in the fading light. I whispered the words that had held me together until now, as if Arturo were standing behind me. Respect first, inheritance second. And for the first time in weeks, the air smelled of hope, not ashes. A year has passed since the courthouse doors closed behind us, and the rhythm of my days has changed with the seasons. The house by the coast breathes lighter now, the sound of seagulls drifting through the open windows, mixing with the voices of volunteers who come to help with the Therese Dignity Foundation. Arturo's trust is no longer idle in a folder of numbers. It feeds families who keep vigils in hospital rooms. It builds quiet spaces where grief can rest without shame. In those walls, Arturo's dream of a hospice wing has taken shape, and his handwriting lives in every blueprint brought to life. Esteban works on a dock in Puerto Esmeralda. The first few months were hard, but he stayed. He rents a small apartment, pays his bills on time, and as far as I know, keeps the bottles at bay. Last week, an envelope arrived. Crooked handwriting on the front. Inside was a letter, the first apology that felt real. He wrote about choices he regretted, nights he replayed in his mind, about wanting to earn, not demand, respect again. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in the drawer next to Arturo's pen.
This morning, after the foundation meeting was over and the house fell silent, I went up to the study. I filed the last reports in the trust drawer, then turned the key in the lock. The spare key that Arturo kept on his keychain gleamed in the sunlight. I picked it up, heavy and familiar, and hung it on a nail inside the cabinet door where only I could see it. Love without respect is a debt, I whispered in the stillness. I am no longer paying in silence.